If you've ever felt like you're living a life that wasn't quite yours, carrying burdens you didn't choose, this conversation might be for you. I'm Barbie Wolf, and you're listening to Unboxing Barbie, a space for honest conversations about healing, faith, and becoming truly ourselves. Let's unpack this together. Here we go. Unboxing fear. What do we do with fear? For me, it's launching a podcast. Scared, very scared. It might sound silly, it's just me in a room, but sometimes fear is louder than reason. And for me, the fear of not being good enough has polluted my thoughts for far too long. When I started the podcast, I re-recorded episode 0 3 times. That's why I labeled the final attempt "Do Not Delete," to keep myself from erasing it out of perfectionism and fear. There are many reasons why I don't want to do this, mostly fear-related. Actually, every single one of them, now that I think about it, is rooted in fear. And so I'm learning to grapple with that and to let fear be fear, feel it, and do what I need to do anyway. Fear is tricky for me, though. It's been a part of my life since before I was born. According to my mom, I had a vanished twin. There's a common thread for those who've experienced this. It's a deep underlying fear, and it makes sense. Imagine only knowing life with another human life next to you, and now you're all alone in a space that used to have another beating heart. I never gave it much thought when my mom talked about the details of my delivery. She wasn't always an honest narrator, so we had to sift through what was real and what wasn't. Regardless, the home I grew up in was a blended family, and can't really get into the details, but fear was a part of our regular routine. And for my new friends, I feel inclined to let you know that I am a person of the uppercase W word, the Bible. So some episodes are going to include some of that because it's just who I am. I won't delve too deeply regularly because that's not the purpose of this podcast. If my listeners want to dive into really deep spiritual concepts in scripture, there are likely hundreds or even thousands of podcasts that can steer you in literally any direction that you would like to go. For me, I'm always reading the Bible from a position of applying the concepts that Jesus walked in right here, right now, where the rubber meets the road of life, applying the things that I'm reading and learning to my everyday life, whether it's in my parenting or in just being a kind human. And the problem with fear, from what I can tell about neuroscience and the Bible, is that fear and love cannot occupy the same space at the same time. You have to choose to respond out of one or the other. You simply cannot operate in both. And newsflash, fear isn't going anywhere. It's part of our everyday life. And our instinct for self-preservation tells us to hide, to erase ourselves, to avoid pain. But true preservation, real healing, comes from stepping into the scary places, turning on the lights, and unboxing fear instead of keeping it packed away. We grow by being honest about our humanity and choosing connection over shame. It's not about becoming perfect or fearless. It's about doing the hard things, perfect or not, about taking the steps one after the other until we find our rhythm. It's a continual process, choosing again and again to offer what we have, imperfections and all, and staying close to our people. Restoration and growth happen when we recognize our shared humanity, offer what we have, even imperfectly, and choose connection over isolation. Fear and shame will come, but love and community have the final word. Shrinking in fear or shame is such a natural response. I heard someone refer to the impulse to delete oneself as self-erasure, and that term makes so much sense. It's the drive to hide when we feel flawed or exposed, and this isn't a new problem. The choice to disappear after failure or stay connected, it's ancient. We see it in the Bible, throughout literature, and in countless examples in real life. Recently, I was reading the word and came across the portion of scripture that stood out to me, which anyone with a religious background will recognize as the story of Judas's betrayal and Peter's denial. In case you don't know the story, Peter and Judas, that's two roads after failure. Setting the scene, it's time for morning prayer. Jesus had already conducted his reconnaissance at the temple the night before. He sees the state it's in. He walks into the temple in the morning with premeditated precision and turns each and every symbol of human socioeconomics on its head. He then walks out, heals a bunch of people, tries to eat figs for breakfast, can't, and decides to use the example of the barren tree as a living parable about avoiding hypocrisy. Later in the afternoon, Jesus goes back to the temple, destroys the arguments from every social and religious group's most knowledgeable and learned scribes and scholars. Immediately after this, he turns to the crowd and basically says, don't reach for titles among any of the human systems of honor and hierarchy. And then he sets new rules. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and all your strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Partner with justice, love mercy, and walk humbly. Next, Jesus publicly sets the religious elite in their place by using them as a cautionary tale to his followers and all the crowds. Jesus warns them about being all lampstand and no oil or flame or flow. But then he responds to his anger and speaks his truth. And after his last trip down the temple steps, he launches into the famous Olivet Discourse. Jesus closes the day with a lesson about the fig tree and all of the lessons to the crowd to keep their focus on love and community. He also reminded them to steer clear of greed, pride, and hypocrisy. The whole time, people are hanging on his every word, Mary especially. Anyone who could write was likely carrying scraps of things that Jesus had said that brought them hope or increased their faith. Mary hears Jesus speaking all of the things to come, and she believes him. She hears him speaking about his life and his death and the prophecy and brings her most valued, at least by human standards, treasure, and empties it on him. The jar of nard was the one thing that set her apart from the other sex workers in the area. It was her custom scent that a year's wages went into creating. She could have operated in fear for her future, worrying about how long it might take her to earn enough to make another jar. Actually, she might have, and she still chose love. Surrendered, adoring, precious love, which seems to have freaked Judas out. It's likely that he couldn't reconcile the magnitude of what he viewed in her actions as a waste. And then to have Jesus chastise him and honor her, inconceivable. Here's where Judas moves away from love and into what I see as a fear that grips him. He's in a completely different social structure and is perhaps questioning everything Judas thought he signed up for by following Jesus. By dinner time, Judas has set his fear and his uncertainty into action. I imagine if I were Judas, because I absolutely have been in one way or another, I might think that my help might persuade Jesus into bringing the plan that I think is supposed to happen into action. It's quite obvious to me, anyway, that Judas is interpreting things differently than during all of those walks and meal times and prayer times and teachings than the other disciples were, though. At sundown, Jesus, representing the patience and kindness of God, offers Judas another chance. He says, one of you will betray me. Seems like Jesus is remaining in authentic, heartbreaking love for Judas. I mean, he's one of the 12 for the love. Judas has already set things in motion, has already betrayed his friend, but Jesus uses the future tense when he lets those at the table know that somebody was going to betray him. Perhaps holding on to hope that Judas will choose the path of love. Once the Passover meal is over, Peter receives his pre-test instructions. The things that Jesus had predicted were already starting to happen, but he is absolutely not listening. Peter is the strong, dependable one. Be serious. Peter himself said that he would die before he would allow betrayal into his friendship with Jesus. Jesus, though, loves Peter and ups the ante. He triples down on Peter's assertion, and the deck is stacked. Peter has choices in front of him and a bunch of information to guide him. It's important to note that his heart, though, is one of a devoted follower. He truly loves Jesus. He believes he couldn't deny knowing this man, Jesus, who transforms lives through his simple obedience. In Peter's eyes, Jesus is the manifest presence of God's love on this earth. He cannot imagine himself doing anything to violate Jesus' trust. Jesus set another living parable into motion with the rooster crow warning. Side note, imagine hearing that sound from that morning on. The dawn, always bringing with it a reminder of my departure from love in pursuit of self-preservation. Back to the story. Peter and the other disciples watched as Judas walked up to Jesus' cheek and planted that kiss. Rage engulfs Peter. So he acts out of a very strong emotion, uses a weapon, and then watches his very innocent and amazing friend choose love and compassion and heal the damage Peter's emotions caused. I imagine that would make you question your own motives in a completely different way. Throughout the entire night, Peter watches the master orator Jesus standing utterly silent regarding his own legal defense. It's likely that no one present that day had ever witnessed anything like it. This sequence of events seems to prime an already confused, scared, and tired Peter to disintegrate into his least loving self. So completely, in fact, that by Matthew 26:75, Peter and Judas are equals. Peter hears the rooster crow that third time and is utterly spent in repentance, weeping on the ground. This isn't a few quiet tears. This is a gut-wrenching, soul-crushing sob. He likely went outside to escape the courtyard, and there he completely broke down. It's such a powerful and human moment. The man who swore he would die for Jesus crumbles completely, and the bitter weeping shows the depth of his shame and sorrow. It's the rock hitting rock bottom. Peter's failure was loud, repeated, and public. His weeping was the agony of a man whose self-image was completely shattered. The rock had crumbled into dust. But in that moment of total brokenness, he made a choice. He didn't let the fear of rejection that feeds shame consume him and drive him into permanent isolation. He stayed. He huddled with the other terrified disciples. He chose to remain in the orbit of the very people who would remind him of his future for sure. But they were also the only ones who shared his love for Jesus. His repentance, as bitter as it was ultimately life-giving because it was rooted in a desperate clinging love. It kept him in the game long enough for grace to find him. It's a profound story about what happens after failure. Both men in this story betrayed Jesus. But Peter's story shows that no failure is so great that it can't be met with forgiveness and restoration if you're willing to stay connected and choose love. Judas's story is the tragedy of what happens when guilt and fear sever those connections entirely. From my limited perspective, it's possible that Peter was able to see the Judas in himself in the moment that rooster crowed. And his horror wasn't just, I broke my promise. It was the soul-crushing recognition that the capacity for betrayal was in him too. Peter the Rock, the chief apostle, the one who drew the sword first, was made of the same fragile, fearful stuff as the man who sold Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. And that right there is the antidote to the kind of despair that leads to self-erasure. Judas saw himself as a singular, monstrous traitor. He was isolated in his guilt. He couldn't see a way back because he believed his crime was uniquely unforgivable. He served himself his own sentence because he saw himself as separate from everyone else in his failure. Judas reminds me of me. When I'm erasing myself for someone to gain access to certain parts of me, or I'm giving more than I need to, trying to fill voids that I see the need to be filled, but maybe aren't my place to actually fill. I have a friend who used to say something about me and holding everybody's keys. And it's because I easily see problems before they occur in certain ways, and I'm always trying to help others stay connected to healing as a whole, to their detriment and mine sometimes. I'm often holding on too tightly or doing too much. And here I go, giving myself words like too. So many of us have loved ones who have made similar choices to Judas, people who saw suicide as the only way out. It really seems that the fear of not being valued is so crucial to life that some people choose death if they think that they won't ever experience the value that can be found in reciprocal love again. And others don't. Others hold out for hope. They hold on to hope. They keep trying. They keep putting themselves out there, however it looks. Whether it's the grieving mom who's going to get that blowout every 6 weeks because it's the only time her hair gets to tell the story that she wants it to tell, or the terrified introvert parent who showing up at that community group week after week in attempt to connect with someone. I mean, there are so many possibilities of people hurting in the world and carrying so much hardship that they just want to erase themselves to be less. We want to show people less of our story sometimes because I think that looking at the pain in your eyes will mirror the pain in my own, and I just don't want to see it. So I erase, I pull back, I isolate, however it may look. We all have the choice to move forward in love, though, for ourselves and for others. And so this is the kind of life I'm trying to learn to live. Leaning forward in love, letting my fear show me places where I don't have a fortified support system or whatever. To simply lean into feeling the fear, acknowledge it, and then assess it from there. If there's anything I need to own up in a current problem, I take ownership. And then I put my foot on the ground in front of me and do the very next right thing, the thing that feels most authentic, most life-giving to the people in my immediate sphere right now. Like, what can I choose? I'm going to choose love as often as possible. It's not easy, but it is possible. Peter in his weeping was forced into a terrible, painful, but ultimately life-saving humility. He saw his own failure reflected in Judas's, And that changes everything about his future. It's what keeps us from the bitterness and the fear that consumed Judas. When I can look at someone else's failure and think, I see that capacity. I see the capacity for that in myself. It doesn't drag either of us down, actually. It connects us. It fosters empathy. It keeps me rooted in a shared, flawed humanity, which is exactly where the love of God and his people can take hold. Again, it's not about becoming fearless. It's about what we do when we realize we are full of fear and prone to failure, just like everyone else. The idea that our greatest failures don't have to lead to self erasure, but can instead lead to a radical, humbling empathy. That might be the key that unlocks a deeper understanding of love itself. Judas died alone with no hope of restoration or resurrection. Peter got to see his friend again because he chose to pursue love. In case there's some fairy tale notion that Peter had this one big failure, wept bitterly, and then was a perfect, fearless leader forever after, no, I'll correct that right now. He was still Peter. He still had insecurities. He was still capable of falling back into fear. In that case, the fear of what the circumcision party thought of him, which led him to act against the very gospel of grace he was supposed to be championing. Eventually, Peter must have moved a bit further away from the withered fig tree that happened a few chapters prior, because Paul reported that even humble Peter eventually has trouble with hypocrisy. Jesus provided these kinds of living parables, these rocks of remembrance, these Ebenezers, for us to remain anchored in love, and especially to abide in the love of God and our neighbor. And this is exactly what makes them so powerful. They aren't about achieving a state of perfection, they're about the process. They're a toolkit for the journey, for the moments when you realize, oh no, here I am again, standing by a different kind of fire, warming my hands and pretending to not know someone. Both Peter and Judas failed Jesus. Both likely felt fear and shame, but Peter stayed. After his denials and bitter weeping, he returned to the community. His healing began because he chose love, not isolation. Instead of seeking restoration, Judas withdrew, convinced that his failure was absolutely unforgivable. Peter's humility allowed him to see his own brokenness and perhaps even the Judas within himself. And so it seems to me that recognizing our shared capacity for weakness and failure is what connects us, keeps us humble, and makes empathy possible. Judas saw himself as uniquely beyond redemption. Peter, in a shattered state, let himself be restored by staying present and choosing love. So we have this contrast. Judas afraid, isolated, consumed by shame. Peter afraid, broken, open, but restored. They both felt fear. They both failed. What made the difference? One walked alone in isolation. The other stayed close enough to find community and healing. And if you actually zoom out, you can see fear all over this whole story. The disciples all scattered when Jesus is arrested. The religious leaders obsess over public image and popularity. Jesus calls them out earlier. Even Pilate literally washes his hands in front of the crowd because of fear of public opinion. I've had that fear. What will people think? I know you have. The fear that drives us to act one way in public, even though it's not who we really are. On a personal note, I've lived my own version of both Peter and Judas. Fear has always been present. From my earliest memories through my struggles with faith and even in my family dynamics, I know what it's like to want to disappear or to withdraw out of embarrassment or perceived failure. But every time I choose to show up, messy, imperfect, terrified, that's where healing and connection begin, both for me and for those around me. This pattern shows up everywhere. It's not just biblical. We have the classical literature, Romeo and Juliet. We've got Brutus, torn between love for Caesar and the fear for Rome, making his choice, and then he literally falls on his sword when he can't live with the consequences. Amy Semple McPherson, famous evangelist from the early 1900s. When faced with potential scandal, instead of choosing transparency within her community, she created an elaborate story about being kidnapped to cover what many believe was an affair. Rather than trusting her congregation with her humanity, she chose deception to protect her image. She died in 1944 from an accidental overdose of sleeping pills. Another tragic example of someone who couldn't reconcile her public persona with her private struggles. Modern examples. Monica Lewinsky, who absorbed brutal public consequences but refused total erasure, eventually transforming her shame into anti-bullying advocacy. Drew Barrymore, who faced addiction and public struggles but kept choosing recovery and connection. I understand the Romeo and Juliet story on a lot of levels. I was a divorced woman in an evangelical community, and there was a person I was making private choices with that would affect my ministry. And I wanted to bring friends and leaders into our unfolding relationship, but there was a different set of circumstances that would arise from bringing people into the honesty of our story. So one of us needed a little more time, which meant we stayed stuck. We stayed stuck in fear. There was no room in our scope of possibility for anyone to accept our story. Sound familiar? Romeo and Juliet couldn't separate themselves from the concept that they'd have to choose either of their families over each other. There was no room in their scope of possibility for either family to find love and acceptance in them. We couldn't imagine a world where our community might find a way to embrace the complexity of our situation. So we opted out instead, or got blinded by the mirrors that were pointed at us and reacted in kind. I don't know. I eventually faced very public consequences for those choices, and that's a story for another episode. But it taught me even more deeply what it means to choose love over fear when everything inside you wants to disappear. There's a distinction between healthy retreat and self erasure, though. Kelly Clarkson comes to mind. She faced a very public, contentious divorce and chose to stay connected to her work, her audience, and her community. She displayed quiet strength while rebuilding her life. But right now, with the recent death of her ex-husband just weeks ago, she's gone quiet in grief and support for her kids. That's completely different from self-erasure. That's healthy retreat for processing an enormous loss, especially when children are involved. There's profound wisdom in knowing when pulling back is self-care versus when it's self-erasure. Self-erasure says, I don't deserve to take up space in this community anymore. One leads back to connection when you're ready. The other leads away from it forever. So consequences are inevitable, but self-erasure is optional. I was poloing with a friend who is struggling with her creative writing process. She's been working on a memoir about her father's death. Then I told her that the way I choose to see life and my offerings is by saying, we give what we have and we trust the Lord to make it enough. Later, she sent something like it back to me saying, you need to put this on a sticky note on your desk because I did after hearing you say it. Honestly, this has been my philosophy since I started walking with the Lord in 1997. I had a lot of reasons to feel less than, so I was continually confronted with my shame, guilt, remorse, and embarrassment over my past whenever I walked into any church. I had to learn early that showing up imperfect was better than not showing up at all, though. And that's it. That's the antidote to self-erasure. Not give what is perfect, not give when you're ready, not give when you've figured it all out. Give what you have right now, in this moment, with all your cracks and imperfections showing, and trust that it can be multiplied, healed, and used. This is what Peter did. He gave his broken, ashamed, tear-stained presence back to the community. This is what I did when finally publishing episode 0 instead of deleting it. It's what Mary did when she poured out her most precious possession. This is what Monica Lewinsky did when she transformed her humiliation into advocacy. And for me, I see myself in all of this. I'm afraid even now, afraid of recording and publishing this podcast. I'm afraid of letting people down or messing it up. And for you, it's maybe not a podcast. It might be a conversation you've been avoiding or an idea you're too scared to share. Perhaps a relationship where love feels too risky. Fear whispers, hide, isolate, protect yourself. But I don't want to live like Judas. I don't want fear to push me out of community and magnify my shame until it feels unbearable. I want to live more like Peter, willing to admit failure, even to weep, but to stay close enough to be restored. The cost of self-erasure costs me in ways that are hard to imagine, and it robs the ones around me and the ones I love of connection with me, connection with the authentic me. When we choose the path of Judas, isolation, transactional thinking, or the belief that our failure is uniquely unforgivable, we don't just hurt ourselves, we deprive our communities of the gifts that come through our brokenness, through our healing, through our hard-won wisdom. Peter's failure became part of his story of redemption. His tears watered the ground where his future ministry would grow. His recognition of the Judas in himself made him a leader who could shepherd others with profound empathy and grace. I mean, can any of us actually imagine life without the real, honest, and vulnerable Drew Barrymore show? I know I can't. I'm so thankful that she didn't self-erase. So maybe that's the real invitation today. Where in your life are you choosing fear over love? Where has fear whispered that you'd be safer in hiding when what you really need is to stay close enough to be restored? The next time you're standing in your own courtyard, warming your hands by the fire of other people's expectations, and you realize you're about to deny yourself the very thing you love, remember Peter's choice. Remember that your failure doesn't have to lead to self-erasure. It can lead to a deeper, more humble, more connected version of love. Give what you have right now. Stay rooted in community. Let your tears, your stories, and your courage be enough. Because the rooster's crow isn't the end of your story. It can be a new beginning. Restoration is possible for Peter, for me, for you. Give what we have. That's the action. It was publishing episode 0, even when it still felt imperfect. It's showing up with your brokenness, your doubt, your 5 loaves and 2 fish, your tear-stained face in the courtyard. It doesn't say give what is perfect or give what is finished. Give what you have right now. Ask the Lord to make it enough. That's the release. That's the faith. It's letting go of the need to control the outcome. It's trusting your imperfect offering can be multiplied, healed, and used. It's the opposite of Judas's despair, which insisted that his failure was so absolute it could never be enough for forgiveness. Our instinct for self-preservation screams at us to avoid pain, to avoid allowing people in so far that they can see beyond any facade we built up or any structure that we're hoping will hold up their opinion of us. I don't know. Some of us are just trying to build our own self-worth here, and we don't even know how to navigate our way through a birthday without feeling intense fear or shame, because you don't even want to breathe sometimes. Humanity is hard. It's weird. There's this instinct to avoid pain, to build the walls, and to not poke at the things that make us want to weep bitterly on the ground. But there's another deeper instinct at play in me right now anyway. It's the instinct for healing, because I know that true preservation isn't found in healing, but it's found in actually integrating the parts of me that are healed and allowing those parts to provide life and love and kindness to the rest of me that needs healing and to those who are around me. And then in my immediate sphere, the people that I'm actually in charge of nurturing through this existence for as long as I can be here for, I'm trying to find a wisdom that understands that walking into this scary room and turning on the lights and unboxing fear is the only way to rob it of its power. And as proof right here, living proof that I'm sitting here recording this is that I'm choosing the path of Peter. I'm not going to become Judas. I've already shown that. And I don't just mean this in a religious sense. One of the things I do when I read scripture is to apply every single thing I read in the Bible to my life right now. If it doesn't apply to now, it's basically irrelevant to me. Not that the word is irrelevant to me, but it's just, it has to apply to my life. And the one thing that I keep seeing constantly or over and over again in history, and the people I've dealt with and the people I've either been hurt by or influenced by or led by, people are choosing to operate in fear or they're choosing to operate in love. We have power in our words, in our responses, in our choices, in our actions, and in the way that we treat the people around us to positively impact our communities. I personally start at my house. I start at my home. I'm not going to point a finger at an administration or another country as much as I would love to join in on that rhetoric because I'm a passionate girl who loves a good riot to get behind. But I have enough work to do here in the actual place where I do my actual living, like the limping footsteps to the school half a mile away, or the late night comfort sessions for kiddos who need extra help. That's where I want to be, operating in a place of love and not fear. It's hard work because fear has been ingrained, encoded into my DNA. Scientists can tell you anything you want to know about how big my amygdala is because of all the trauma, and it's lame, but it is what it is. And here I am, living proof that we can choose to roll back, step back, and choose to live in love and kindness and not shrink away in self-preservation. And I can't wait to find the balance between the two, because for so many people like me or others who are survivors of a lot of different kinds of trauma, there's this like underlying current of this is my last one. Like, this is my last coffee. This is my last birthday card. This is my last Christmas. This is my last relationship. And it makes sense because some of us have lost a lot. And here we are, whether we've lost very little in the grand, like in quotes, little on the grand scheme of things, or whether we've lost a lot. We've all lost something at some point. So we all have suffered. Sure, some with trickier childhoods than others. And we might have to weed through more layers of self-preservation and protection of all the different parts of us who weren't allowed to develop in a safe, nurturing home, an environment that didn't allow us to acknowledge and express our feelings and have conversations about harder topics like greed and anger, as well as the more complex emotions in a safe place. So Many of us weren't allowed to feel them due to a plethora of different reasons. I, though, want to stay rooted in the possibility of love and resurrection, even when it means facing denial, shame, and the embarrassment of my mistakes. I want to take ownership of the things that are mine and not have someone else pick up any trash that I leave behind. I'll pick up the things that I have to pick up from my own caregivers who let me down so that this generation doesn't have to, though. That's mine to discard, not theirs. I'm thankful to be in a place where I can actually observe the things that I've been carrying around that I don't need to be. Because every trigger that is rooted in the things that my mom didn't deal with before she brought children into the world is just dead weight for me. I have a lot to carry as it is. I'd like to let some of her stuff go. I'm truly grateful to be here, though, tearing down the structures that have been in place and the boxes that have been packed away for so many years so that I can breathe more life into the people around me and carry less of my own baggage with me, making my mistakes and asking for repair, not closing my eyes to the things that make me wince without doing some deep reflection into why I'm wincing. Am I hiding something? Am I worried that something's going to happen to me? Am I seeing something I shouldn't be seeing? I no longer want to be a person who arbitrarily carries fear, or at least the fear that isn't for actual survival reasons, where like there's an immediate threat to my body, or there's some financial crisis that seems insurmountable, or any number of medical diagnoses that are terrifying. There's fear. Fear will be right here. Let's acknowledge that fear and then welcome the opportunity to move forward in love so that we can keep the community and the space around us as free from our own trash as possible. Choosing true love and humility and ownership of our own shortcomings or weaknesses is where we join in the long list of people who have literally changed the world by being real and honest about their own failures, avoiding the pull of erasing ourselves from the narrative completely, and remembering to stay rooted in community is crucial because that's where we heal. As humans, we cannot control when our mistakes or failures confront us. Mistakes are an inevitable part of life. Some people make them very loud while others don't, but we all make mistakes. The only way to grow is to fail, to overcome something, or to advance to a higher level. So we're just going to have to deal with it. It's part of the learning of life. We can try to make it all perfect, button it all up, and ensure that it is as polished and perfect as we can. And it will still never be perfect. It will still never be perfect. We need to recognize things that move us from love to fear, whether it's the fear of being humiliated or something else. I don't know what Judas's thing was. I don't know what thing Peter was wrestling with when he was on the ground. For me, I would probably feel like I had let somebody I loved down, and that would just wreck me in the deepest of ways. From what I read about Peter, he seemed to have been living a life, though, like I want to live. When I'm down on the ground in remorse and humiliation, and I face that first fork in the road between choosing the path of love and healing and community or the path of fear-driven self-preservation or self-indictment, that right there is my invitation to confront my motives and then crawl forward, figuring out how I'm going to carry a safer human forward, whether it's safer for myself or for others. And so, I don't know, I'm giving myself a permission slip to do this project despite being completely terrified anyway. What I'm hoping for here in this space is to offer anything I have to anyone who wants to listen and wants to find their way out of the natural drive of humans to self-preserve, both societally and in every other way. The fear response is so loud, so strong, yelling so loudly and so clearly within us. We can feel the fear, address it, but rather than judging ourselves for feeling the feeling or for having a failure or whatever in the first place, maybe we could take a look at our own actions, our own choices, and hold them for what they actually are. Look at them at face value and say, now, what am I going to do with this? I'm just going to continue to share what I have and open this conversation for us to explore what it might look like to allow ourselves to reveal the things we want to hide about ourselves or from others. There are so many reasons to hide. That's normal. It's natural. As long as we don't hide so long that we don't find ourselves back to love. What we do now, like after we fail, what do we do when we're afraid? Perhaps it's as simple as this. Live your life with eyes wide open to the places where you're choosing fear over love, if you can. I'm trying to live this kind of life. And it's not easy, but it's worth every single second of effort and reminder. Perhaps each of us can choose to reach forward in love and kindness, ensuring that we all strive for mutual flourishing. I think that would be a really good place to start and end. Thank you so much for listening. I love you guys. I'll see you next time.